Well, welcome everyone to our webinar on the bad KPI habits. I am Stacey Barr. I'm a performance measure specialist, have been for my entire career, and I'm also creator of the PUMP methodology, which is for performance measurement. And I have a co-host with me today, Paul Frith, and I wanted to collaborate with Paul to give you a little taste of how to make performance measurement easier before we invite you to join Paul at one of his upcoming Pump Performance Measure Blueprint workshops in London. This webcast, we're hoping, will help you test if your organisation has any of the main bad KPI habits that we'll share with you. And if you discover that it does, this may help you to decide if the time is right for you to try Pump and join Paul in London in December to learn exactly how to do it and how to delete the bad KPI habits and replace them with proper measurement practice. So over the coming hour, you'll find out what the most common struggles are that we have with performance measurement and which of the bad KPI habits actually cause them. You'll also get some very practical tips for what to do instead of those bad KPI habits, and that's going to make measuring performance easier and more meaningful for you. You can ask us questions at any time throughout the webcast. We'll do our best to answer them as they come in, but we do have time set aside toward the end of the webcast to answer any questions that we don't get to during. Our intention is that the outcome you take from this webcast, participating in it, will be that you'll become better at making your intangible goals more measurable. You'll become better at crafting meaningful and quantitative measures for those goals, and you'll be better at engaging more people in measuring what matters. Now, for those of you who are meeting either me or Paul for the first time today, we're just going to do a brief introduction of ourselves. That's me on the left. I am a performance measure specialist. What are you laughing at, Paul?
I think that one's an obvious one.
I suppose it is obvious, yeah. Anyway, ever since I left university, where I did statistical, mathematical statistics and majored in that, I've just worked in the measurement space. The mid-90s, I was a corporate performance measurement consultant in Queensland Rail. But in 1999, I started my own consultancy, and measurement's been my niche. So it's what I've done for my whole career. I think I probably enjoy most making my ideas about measuring what matters just easy for other people to understand and to use. And that's kind of the energy that Pump came from. It's a methodology that I developed over this entire time, and it has found its way all around the world. So much so, in fact, that I now have a global team of licensees to help more people with Pump, because I can't, especially from Australia, if any of you have been to Australia, you know how long it takes to get here. It's impossible for me to do that. So having wonderful people like my co-host today, Paul Frith of Rubica Change and Analytics, as licensed Pump partners, it just makes it so much easier. So Paul is our regional partner for the UK and Europe. Paul, you want to share a bit about yourself?
Yeah, will do. So obviously, I'm the troublemaker on the right-hand side. So I've been working with Pump. It's about 2008 when I first came across Stacey, and I was working in an analytics consultancy in central London, and we had clients that had been spending vast sums of money with us on business intelligence tools and reporting databases, and they're really trying to drive insights into their company, but also to automate their reporting. But internally within that consultancy, we were quite frustrated, and our customers weren't focusing as much effort on what the data meant and actually how this data impacted on the strategy and the evidence it provided, is actually just us creating the automation itself. So we were looking for a way of helping them to really think about that side of the equation a little bit more, and really helping leaders and their teams to change their performance and really drive that forward. So when that business was sold, it was fairly natural that we then carry on focus on pump. And I decided that actually it was time to focus more on organizational change and performance measurement. So how do we really help the leaders and teams to drive that improvement in performance? And pump was a natural part of that, as well as actually then focusing in on the culture, and also actually how do we help people with organizational excellence. And that's really where Rubric was born, and the decision to really continue and help people even more closely actually with pump, and then take on this role working with Stacey in this way.
Which is brilliant. And Paul handles all of the UK and Europe when it comes to pump training and consulting and coaching. Today's webinar is a chance for you to get a little taste of the difference that some of pump can make for you. We obviously aren't going to turn this into an entire training course. It takes 2 days to really learn pump. But it'll give you a sense of if any of the struggles that you have with measurement and KPIs really can be targeted with pump. So we're going to explore a few things in this webinar. Fundamentally, there's no point waiting for better KPIs to come along. They're just not going to do that by themselves. And there's absolutely no point trying harder at your current approach if your current approach to getting measures just isn't working. So we want to make the reasons why measurement feels so hard more visible to you. And that way you can do something about it. You can try something different, something that works, and make measuring easier as well as more meaningful.
So we're sharing these ideas with you now because we've got some pump blueprint training workshops coming up. And it's really a great opportunity to really see if it's the right time to take a fresh approach to your KPIs. And as Stacey's already said, really help you decide, is pump right for you? And will actually help to solve the kind of struggles that you're having around your KPIs. And to get to, it's a phrase we use quite a lot, but it's at the core of pump, really get to those meaningful measures that you're looking for.
Where pump came from is based on, like Paul said, a unique understanding of what people struggle with, what they actually struggle with when it comes to KPIs, metrics, performance measures, whatever you want to call them. So pump is not going to give you the KPI databases, and it's not going to tell you to brainstorm your metrics or measures, because we know that never works. Instead, we want to help you understand and overcome your struggles with the steps of doing the measuring, and that will make it faster and easier, more meaningful and more engaging. Now, it's a great and useful place to start then to understand these struggles that we have with KPIs and measuring performance, because my guess is if you weren't struggling, why would you be here on this webcast with us anyway? So now is your chance to use the questions box in your webinar control panel and just answer this simple question. Tell us at least one of the struggles you have with KPIs or performance measures. What's one thing that's really hard for you when it comes to measuring performance, or hard for your organization, or hard for your colleagues? So we'll natter on a little bit to give you a chance to type some of those into the questions box. But I might give you a few warm-up ideas. Oh, I don't need to. They're already coming through. Super. Rebecca says, getting leaders to be specific. Rebecca, my guess is that when you say specific, you mean not vague or too broad in the way goals are written.
We've got Nicole here talking about actually being subjective, and really just actually perhaps every time they look at the measure, you get a different actually decision as to whether it was good or bad.
Yeah. Sean's saying the integrity of data is a challenge. Good grief, they're coming in thick and fast.
Carl actually was one of the fastest off the block, and it moved off the line already. We don't really know why we do it, and it's maybe a bit shocking on a webinar of people who have come to hear about KPIs and probably have an interest in it, but that is one of the most common issues, is that organizations really don't understand why they're bothering to measure.
Indeed. Pauline says getting buy-in from stakeholders, that it is something to start working with. Oh, and I see Rebecca's just said we were correct in interpreting what she meant by getting leaders to be specific. Are you losing track, Paul? Do you want me to keep going?
There's so many that suddenly came in. Yes, I did. I haven't got the window open correctly. That's a bit of a shock, isn't it?
Okay.
But we've got Simon talking about the senior team, getting them to agree what are the right measures, and they just expect to be given a list of measures rather than actually owning them. So again,
Mm-hmm.
this thing that it's somebody else's job to come up with these measures, and actually then perhaps not showing the accountability and ownership of really pulling through a performance improvement by actually having the right measures that they focus on.
I see my very good friend Roy in the Netherlands has shared something here. Get rid of the old measures. Yes, that's a challenge. Great to have you here, Roy. I'll jump in with another one. Gianluca says engaging the stakeholders and making everything more crystal clear.
We've got Nathan's talking about measuring intangible, non-quantitative outcomes such as quality, depth of engagement. And again, what do those things really mean, which is why we struggle and feel they're intangible.
Yes. Darren says the struggle is that everyone thinks they know how to define metrics, so we end up with a lot of brainstormed measures. Yeah, common problem, Darren.
And then we've got Lisa there, fear of transparency. Had that one with the team the other day. Just actually, are these measures going to expose me within the organization?
Yeah, because with transparency comes accountability, which is another thing people fear. Let me see. Arden says the struggle is getting leaders to accept that we need to collect different data. That's right. If you want to measure better, often you haven't already got the data for those better measures because you haven't thought you needed the data before.
And Zoe's talks about getting commitment from leaders on agreeing a goal or an ambition rather than just on reporting information. Again, a very common one. People are much more comfortable with just reporting information rather than really linking it back to what are we really trying to do and how will we know whether we're getting there.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, we might wrap it up there because otherwise the whole webcast could be reading out struggles, I suspect, Paul.
So we don't want measurement to be a struggle, and it doesn't have to be. And certainly for Stacey and I, when we see performance measurement working, what it does for an organization is something that nothing else can, and it really gives us proof and confidence that our decisions, our actions are truly working, and they help us to reach our goals and to fill the organization's purpose. Not only can we actually get there, but we can reach the target sooner and actually with less effort. And we can really start to focus in on creating high performance cultures or high performing organizations. But one of the key things that gets in the way of that from happening are the KPI struggles. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what's interesting in all of the organizations, not just when talk to Stacey with Australia, but within Europe and actually across the world, so many of these struggles are actually the same. And they're so similar, it just gets us wondering about what's actually beneath the surface.
And there really is something beneath the surface. Paul, you mentioned about how these struggles are the same the world over. That's so true. Because I've been running my newsletter Measure Up for almost 20 years and having subscriptions from people all around the world, I've asked them over that time when they sign up what their biggest KPI struggle is. And so I've got something like 13 or 14,000 data points of what people's biggest struggles are with KPIs. And when I analyze that stuff over time, you're right. What you said before is they truly are shared struggles, and we find them everywhere, no matter what culture, what sector, what part of the world, what industry. They're very, very common. The thing is that bad KPI habits have, without us realizing it, become common KPI practice, and that's because I think measurement has never really been treated as a process, a deliberate process. It's mostly seen as an afterthought. Maybe it's seen as a bureaucratic hoop to jump through. We just got to get it done because we have to. And there are many people who really aren't that comfortable or even that knowledgeable about how to use numbers to make decisions. So we struggle with KPIs, and we're going to focus on the top three. There are quite a few, and I've written about them on my blog before, but for this webcast, we're going to focus on the three biggest struggles that the research I mentioned before tells us are most common for everyone. So Paul, how about you kick us off with the first one?
All right, well, perfect. So people don't value measurement is one of those top three struggles. And some of you guys actually mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. And
Yep.
people just often don't, they do see it as an afterthought. It's that extra thing to do. It's not part of their real work. And it's actually something that's put on them. It's part of an activity that they do normally once a month, and probably is just something they do for the reporting pack. And it was really interesting. A couple of years ago, I was working with an energy company, and it was around their health and safety reporting. And even here, where the topic is so clearly about preventing harm, we could see this playing out. There were two camps. Those performance officers who logged in once a month to record all the incidents or the near misses that were happening on the site, versus those that were reporting all the information in the moment, so to speak. And funnily enough, when we started to look at the performance, we correlated the business impact. It was very clear that those who valued measurement as a tool to support them, the ones were actually able to improve the health and safety in their sites. And in the others that were going through the motions and felt it was actually just something they had to do, then performance actually was staying the same and they weren't getting the improvements they're looking for.
Well, there you go. Actual better performance is correlated with valuing measurement, but we know that's not commonplace. Let's do a quick poll with the raise your hand tool. So on your webcast, your webinar control panel, there's a little hand. If this is a struggle that you see playing out in your organization, just click raise your hand and I'll report back and tell you what proportion of you all are saying yes to that one. Okay, hands are going up, they're still going up. Oh my, that's more than half of you. Paul, can you see the hands going up?
I can, yes.
I think we're probably at about 3/4 of you. So I'm going to say, just to be conservative, 70% of our audience today has put their hand up and said this is a struggle, that people in your organization are not valuing measurement. There is a root cause for this struggle. And when you understand what the root cause is, you've got a chance of maybe not fixing it overnight, but starting to turn it around. So that cause is that measures are used to judge people, and that can be overtly, as in they're assigned or attached to your Paul, performance appraisals. Are there other words that people use in the UK and Europe for that?
I mean, performance appraisals are a common one. There's lots of, whether it's PDPs or assessments, but yes, performance appraisals is a common phrase.
Yeah, but measures can also be used or perceived to be used to judge people inadvertently or covertly, where really they're not losing any salary or promotion opportunity because of it, but they're getting fingers of blame pointed at them. Now, this is really uncomfortable because on some level, we all know that none of us has complete control over a single performance measure or the result that it monitors. No one person can do that. It's the system, the way the organization's designed, and the way the processes and policies are put in place, and how this whole system is what causes performance measures to do what they're doing. Hence we're not comfortable with it.
And we're not. And what do? Our natural response is to defend ourselves or to defend our teams even. And we start to game the system or game the measure, but performance actually doesn't improve. So I don't know whether you guys feel that gaming is something you see a lot, but I bet that you've got some great examples of some measures within your business or some situations where you feel that people have been gaming. Do you guys want to use the question functionality and give us some examples of it? There's certainly lots of examples from my point of view, but one that really sticks with me from a while back was a practice of not closing difficult or hard cases in a customer support environment. They closed cases that they could resolve quickly and that were within the kind of SLA or the target. And then because of the way the systems and policies were set up, they let the harder ones actually stay open. They would finish the work, but they'd leave them open in the system. And that way, actually, the age of that case didn't actually impact on their performance metrics and how they were judged, and they were just left invisible in their CRM systems.
We've got one example that's come in from Deborah here, Paul, only inputting sales opportunities after they are won so they do not lose any opportunities. That's a perfect example, Deborah, of gaming.
I've certainly had that experience. We used to call it coming in hot in terms of the sales opportunities, and they landed with no visibility at all. Absolutely.
Darren has one to share too. Fixing the accounts with one issue and leaving the ones with multiple issues to get the numbers down each day. Darren, another brilliant example. And Paul, I think Simon has one. Gaming behaviour tends to happen as a result of poor measures and therefore encourages measure massage. I haven't heard that phrase before. Measure manipulation, fudging the figures. But Simon, I like measure massage. That's great.
We've got one from Lisa, using acknowledgement of customer contact as a qualifying response within SLA, rather than actually resolving the query themselves. Not that that happens on support lines, but yes, something along those kind of lines seems, I think most of us would have experienced that in our actual day-to-day lives, let alone within our companies.
Oh, yeah. Let's take a final one from Nicole. There's still more coming in. Our CEO wanted to publish in the company hallway which projects are running on time with the name of the project manager next to it, and people were furious and protested. Fair enough, Nicole. I think that's, that falls into kind of the point the finger of blame kind of behaviour is too easy. So, yeah. Oh, and then she follows up and says, so it wasn't done. That's a win.
So we all know that we do need accountability within organizations, but the solution is not to use measures to judge. It just disempowers everybody. We really need to use the measures and the metrics that we've got for learning, and then using that learning, we can get the performance to actually improve, and that's got to be our purpose. So measures are a tool in the hand, and they can't be a rod that we use to beat people on their backs. So what we want to measure is processes, how we actually making these things really work, not people, and then we can really actually start to drive that forward. And actually, I'm just going to pick on, actually, I can't remember without scrolling back up who said it, but the sales opportunities only being registered when they're won. And so we actually started working with that within my own company a couple of years ago. And it was really about, well, how do we actually start to break this out so that people don't feel judged in that way? And it was really then working on the process, looking at the qualifiers and the attributes, so that that measure became a story within the business about what's working, what's not working, and how we could all come together in order to help the sales team to actually win the opportunities and move them through that sales pipeline, so that we had early visibility of the potential opportunities that could come in, so we could set up the resources and the teams were ready to then actually deliver on the work as it actually came through. What's the result if we hadn't have? We had lots of work that we just couldn't deliver. It was invisible. It would have broken the business model.
It was Deborah actually who had that comment about the sales, and that's a perfect way of following it up. So certainly about measuring processes or the performance of processes, not measuring the performance of people, is fundamentally important. There are different ways, better ways, more dignifying ways to manage the performance of people, but measures are not a part of that. Another practical thing we can do, and if you want to learn more about this, if you go to my blog and just put accountability into the search box, you'll find a few articles about this, but we need to change our definition of accountability to make measurement actually work properly. Backed up by what Daniel Pink wrote in his book Drive, the truth about what motivates us, and backed up by a myriad of examples in a great book by Dina Gray, Pietro Micheli, and Andrei Pavlov. It's called Measurement Madness. And more recently, The Tyranny of Metrics by Jerry Mueller. I've just had a mental blank on his name. I even interviewed him on my blog. There is so much evidence that we've really got to change what accountability means. So I'll explain it to you quickly what our new definition should be, but then go to my blog to look up more about it. So accountability for measures means A, that you are monitoring the right measures. B, that you are interpreting them validly. And that means there's just a little bit of statistical knowledge that everybody needs who's using a measure. Nothing frightening, nothing scary, nothing hard, but it has to be done validly. And thirdly, that you're initiating action if and when action's needed, not that you are doing all of the action and not that you are hitting targets. That's not part of this definition of accountability. But what that does is it makes it, like Paul said before, about collaborating to improve systems and processes, and that's really what we want measures to drive. There's not going to be any motivation for or engagement in measurement until that feeling of judgment goes away, and we need engagement and we need ownership if we are going to achieve our goals. But as Paul is about to discuss with you, we then come to other problems with our goals.
Absolutely. So if we move on to the second struggle, and again, it's one of the things that you guys have already mentioned earlier, goals are too hard to measure. And it's our second biggest struggle with performance measurement. So what do we have? We have goals like, hey, we need to be agile, collaborative, results focused in terms of what our culture's like. We'll have a business that our people are proud of and fulfill their ambitions whilst motivating them to continually strive in delivering service excellence. We do things in the smartest, most consistent manner and continue to improve and drive this forward. And when goals are worded in this way, they're impossible to measure meaningfully. And just to be clear, whilst those are examples that we've seen day in, day out, all of us struggle with this. And my admission would be that my goals always used to have something like the word optimize hidden in amongst them, which just, well, anyway, shows that all of us struggle with this from time to time.
Oh, look, weasel words still come out of my mouth, and I feel like there's no way I should be telling people not to use them when I'm using them myself, but I try extremely hard, not just when I'm doing measurement or goals, but when I'm just speaking in generally, to avoid using weasel words. Paul and I are curious about whether for any of you, you have some goals that are written vaguely and broadly, goals that are too hard to measure, too intangible to measure. And if off the top of your head you can remember them, please share them as examples for us to read out in the questions box. And irrespective of whether you can remember one or not to type in and share with us, what would be super is if you raised your hand if you have in your organisation goals that are too intangible or hard to measure. So also raise your hand if this is a problem for you.
So Nicole's been quick off the line with fostering a performance-driven culture, a lofty ambition and a great ambition, but not a very clear goal.
Yeah, absolutely. The hands are still going up too, by the way, so I'll give that a few more moments. Lisa says, we want to be a catalyst for better health. Yep, good example, Lisa. That one, no doubt, and as is Nicole's, the true meaning behind it is very noble and important, but the words just aren't helping us tap into it.
And that's similar with Simon's, and it is always that the intent behind these things are usually spot on. So Simon's got to deliver a service fit for purpose for the business. Future-proof bank from Roy, yeah.
From Roy, yeah. Deborah says, all our people can say in their own way, I love my job and I love this company. That's actually getting closer to being more tangible, but maybe it does still need a bit of discussion to get it measurable.
Nathan's talking about excellence is thriving and celebrated in the arts, museums and libraries.
Yep, tough one to measure too. Roy says, again, banking for better for generations to come. Yeah, better is a tricky word to pin down. By the way, Paul, in the background, only half the people's hands have gone up. So I thought this would be almost unanimous that people would have this struggle. Maybe everyone's concentrating on sharing their stories, though.
I think so. This certainly, in my experience, we'd normally get 100% agreement almost that this was the case. Maybe one final one. Simon says, drive innovation to deliver efficiency. All of these examples. They are spot on with the types of things that we hear week in, week out in terms of how we write the measures that we've got.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing them. They are all brilliant examples. And even though not all of you put your hands up, I'm pretty sure that somewhere in your organisation is lurking a goal that is too broad or fluffy or vague or weaselly or intangible to measure. There's a root cause for this struggle because it really is a very, very, very common struggle that gets in the way of people being able to measure meaningfully. And it's really the bad habit of using weasel words. I often get attributed with this phrase, Paul, but it's not actually one that I came up with. I learned this term weasel words from a political speech writer here in Australia who wrote a book called Death Sentence: The Decay of Public Language. And he introduced me to weasel words, but even he didn't create it. Apparently, I think if you go to Wikipedia, it might have been Theodore Roosevelt, who was probably the first known person to have referred to it. But it's based on this story, which also may not be true, that what a weasel does when it finds an egg to eat for its dinner is it puts a tiny little hole in the egg, sucks the guts out of it, and leaves the egg there as though nothing happened. And a weasel word is that. It's an empty shell of a word. It looks right on the outside when we first interact with it, but when we try to go a little deeper, we're actually not sure that it has any content or meaning or depth to it. So when goals are filled with words like appropriate, efficient, effective, quality, reliable, sustainable, thriving, better, celebrated, innovation, fit for purpose, future-proof, and I'm now just looking at Catalyst, at all the examples that you all shared with us before. These are weasel words. And weasel words are hard to measure because of that reason, that like the weasel's dinner, they're vague, they're empty, they're ambiguous, and consequently, they mean different things to different people. So goals that are filled with weasel words cannot be measured because it's not clear what they specifically mean.
Weasel words aren't the only problem, but they are what really is underlying in terms of making things hard to measure. They are certainly one of the biggest problems. And we've had lots of good examples. You know, I had some with a global clothing manufacturer I was working with, and you know, just like the ones that you guys were reading out, create the right environment, structure, processes, and tools, improve and maintain colleague experience. And because it was really impossible to know what these things meant, no clarity within the goal, actually it was impossible for the team then that was left with measuring these to understand where do we go next, and they were becoming really frustrated. So we really do have to focus on understanding what are we trying to do with these goals, and they've got to be anchored into reality. If different people have a different interpretation of a goal, then we don't really have a good goal. And again, one of the things that Stacey has put into Pump is, again, it's almost one of the key phrases is aiming for a 10-year-old language. So what's the language a 10-year-old, a clever 10-year-old would understand? And can we phrase our goals in that to make it absolutely clear what's actually happening? And that's not to dumb down the goal, but what we're trying to do is remove the ambiguity that might be assumed and put within it.
Yep, brilliant. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just going to say one tip. You know, we all try and improve the way we're writing goals. And I was with a team actually just on Monday and Tuesday. And so when we're writing our goals or we're in that strategy kind of session of trying to actually set them up, one of the things that I find helps is actually, and we were just setting some short-term focuses for the beginning of next year. And we used a very simple technique about moving away from and moving towards. So a sentence about what are we moving away from, and a sentence that clearly tries to articulate what we're moving towards. And then by having those two simple statements, it really actually helped people to more clearly articulate what it is the goal was actually about. And what was really interesting is then actually yesterday we were with a team that wasn't with us on those previous 2 days. And it became really easy then with the clearer goal and those two sentences for that team to really pick up and understand where it was coming from, what was expected of them, and actually then to start to put their plans together as to how they'd measure it and actually make it happen.
I haven't heard that method before, Paul. I love it. It's like exploring the goal from opposite perspectives. Some people often say to me, should I write a goal in the positive or in the negative? And I think you're saying do both, because doing both is really going to help you understand the real goal.
Absolutely, because if we do just go, I'm a very outcome focused guy, actually I know you are as well, and it just helps us to pull apart what is actually the change that we're trying to make if we could actually improve that goal that we're focusing in on.
Well, I'm an outcome focused gal, I guess, not so much
true.
guy. I try not to be So everyone, when a goal's written clearly, just say in plain everyday language what it really means, what happens is it becomes observable. It becomes something that we would be able to observe if it was happening, to see, to recognize it. And when something is seeable, touchable, feelable, smellable, tasteable, I don't know, observable in some way, that is what makes it measurable. And measurable doesn't mean measured. Measurable means that we can go about finding meaningful measures that will give us great, useful evidence of that goal. Trouble is, though, that our usual approaches to go find those meaningful measures, even for a measurable goal, aren't working all that well.
So that leaves us with that we have a huge amount of measures in our organizations that are actually useless. And there are lots of reasons for that. But what actually happens is that as a result of that, measures aren't being used. And indeed, actually, it's confusing people about the very purpose of measures. So do you guys have any quick examples of measures in your organizations that you think are useless, that you would put into this kind of category, this struggle? Some of the most common that we see certainly are things like we have measures going in and then actually they're really milestones. Something like complete a road maintenance review project by December or implement a CRM system by September. They're not measures. They're really useful in project planning. They are milestones and they're not evidence of the actual either outcomes or the impact that we're trying to create. Another one I see quite a lot is actually then the activity measures. And again, being an analytics guy, we measure a lot of things. But something like just measuring the number of sales calls, they don't tell us, again, the outcome. They don't tell us the impact of doing something. And it isn't evidence in its own right that it's been done well enough. So it really is something we need to move away from. And we need to find measures that are really going to be useful in terms of moving us forward.
Rebecca's shared one, Paul. Employee engagement metrics, and they can be very useful because sometimes they're chosen just because that's what everybody's measuring these days is employee engagement, and whether they're doing it with the Gallup tool or something else, who knows, but it's just, oh, we need to measure employee engagement, so let's just put down in the KPI column employee engagement. But how do you quantify it? Is it being quantified appropriately for us? Is it really the appropriate measure for the goal we have? So thanks for sharing that, Rebecca.
We've got Nicole that's got one of those milestone type measures here, if I'm reading it right. So extend the ISO certification.
Yep. Which extend ISO certification, is that more of an action or kind of like a milestone to reach, that the ISO certification gets extended? Or
I'm assuming it'll be a milestone. So there will be activity and project with it, but we want to make sure that we've got a continuation of the ISO certification in. Not sure where Nicole's from, but the industry you're in. Yep.
And she just said yes, so that's good. Simon has one. Simon has a comment anyway. He says, I've identified good measures where the data is not yet recorded in the business and therefore requires business change to implement, which turns people off turns people off to the good measures, I guess, and then you slip back into the easy measures. Simon, yes, that's it. It's that can be a limitation, absolutely, when you've come up with really good measures, but the data just isn't there yet, and that's a slightly separate challenge, but it's a bad consequence is that we can absolutely slip back into, oh yeah, let's just measure what we've got the data for, which is rarely the right way to go.
Absolutely, and they just tend to become so generic. They just have no actual meaning in moving the organisation forward.
Indeed. Thanks, everyone, for sharing examples there. There's a root cause to this third struggle, that measures are useless. And that root cause is that too often brainstorming is the way people come up with their measures, or a version of brainstorming. Now, years ago, I was meeting with a client in the Hilton Hotel in Brisbane. And I walked up off the Queen Street Mall into the foyer of the Hilton Hotel and went straight past the function rooms, and they have glass windows, so I was able to see into one of them, and I couldn't believe my timing because it was a KPI training workshop, and the slide that was being shown by the trainer to his little class of learners was instructing them on how to select KPIs. And his advice was brainstorm them. And I just thought, my heart sank. We're still teaching people bad habits in how to come up with measures.
So this is a very common practice to brainstorm KPIs or measures. Certainly it's something I see quite a lot, even if people don't realize they're doing it. What about you guys? So hands up, any of those that think that brainstorming is one of the most common ways that some of your teams or people in your organization go about figuring out what they should measure?
I'm thinking maybe only a fifth of our audience, Paul, is saying yes to that. Oh, a few more hands going up. Maybe a quarter.
Not that you have to say that this is one of them, but it is definitely a reverse process compared to what we're looking at. And what often happens, what you'll find within the organization, is that actually we often end up with too many measures. We have a ton of measures within there. And that actually things that really aren't measures, like we'll have a loyalty program or we need to run a customer survey, half-finished thoughts about what we should measure are often actually left in there as if they are real measures in their own right. And there's not enough detail to really know about how we're going to implement these things that have been brainstormed. And there's no way to actually shortlist and select the best ideas from this creative process.
Indeed. Carl just shared that he said yes to the brainstorming, but just couldn't find the hands up tool. Maybe that's why we're not getting unanimous answers. Not everyone's found it. Rebecca's asked a really good question. Why is brainstorming a bad way to do it? Well, let me answer that for you and for everybody, Rebecca. Brainstorming is a creativity tool. And what a creativity tool does, it's kind of like, if you imagine it like a flower, it's like an opening up procedure. It's about exploring very far and wide and broad all the kinds of options for things, and it is unstructured. It's not giving any guidelines or parameters or examples of what exactly we're trying to develop. And so what people end up doing is coming up with a lot of stuff that really isn't relevant, a lot of stuff and a lot of that stuff that isn't really relevant. For measure design, because measures are evidence of a very specific goal, we want to home in on the smallest amount of evidence or the fewest measures that we can get to that give us the absolute best evidence of our goal. And that means that those measures have to be very, very strong proof of the goal at the same time as being as feasible as possible to implement. Brainstorming doesn't ask us to think about those things, and it's definitely not a narrowing down process, which is exactly what we want measure design to be. And in fact, the measure design technique in Pump does exactly that. It starts you with what is your goal, helps you go broad a little bit to explore the kind of evidence in the real world that would convince you your goal was happening, and then it starts narrowing down on what evidence you should quantify because it's going to be the strongest and most feasible evidence of your goal. So it's a narrowing down process. It's very deliberate and does give you the parameters. So what is evidence of your goal? How can you quantify that evidence? And of those quantifications of the evidence, in other words, potential measures, which are the most relevant and feasible to implement? Just saying, how could we measure this, is not going to answer any of those three questions. And that's what we really need to answer to come up with great measures. Okay, so just a couple of comments there, Paul. I think Darren said measures become important because of specific issues, but the measure isn't helping to solve the issue. Yeah, that can happen. Kind of, it tells me that the measure wasn't chosen as the right kind of evidence of which part of the issue needs to be changed, perhaps. I've just lost track of where we are.
So Rebecca had been asking why brainstorming, and then obviously has come back and said thank you for your explanation, which was clear. I don't think people are always clear why brainstorming doesn't work for measures, but when you actually think about it, it becomes quite clear.
So I've explained something to do different and why to do it differently, but I also see it every time. I see the horrible measures that people come up with when they brainstorm, and then I see the surprise and amazement on their faces when they use the pump measure design tool and end up with measures they actually feel excited about and believe they can implement and cannot wait to start using. So the evidence is there in the 20 years of experience as well, not just in the logic I gave you by contrasting brainstorming with the 3 parts that you need to answer. Anyway, remember that the struggles that Paul and I have just discussed with you are really just the top 3. There are more struggles. And in a sense, that's where pumps come from.
So they're the top 3, probably because they're the first ones people come across, aren't they, Stacey? So as we were actually trying to go through thinking about what we should measure, they're the things that we actually experience first. So they're early in what we call in the performance measurement process.
Yeah. But as you do move through the measurement process, you stop bumping up against those first things. Once you solve them, there are other struggles that people have come across after that point. And it's really the full collection of KPI bad habits that we have that was the reason pump came to be in the first place. Because I had a lot of these struggles when I was the measurement consultant in Queensland Rail, trying to do the job that I think probably many of you joining us today are trying to do now. A good performance measurement process, therefore, needs to have the essential steps to deal with our biggest struggles by giving us something more practical and meaningful to do instead of the bad habits that are causing those struggles. So Paul and I are going to step you through the performance measurement process. Now, this is the pump blueprint. I don't know if it's the only proper performance measurement process on the planet, but after 20 years of asking people and looking for something else, I still haven't found one that ticks off the biggest struggles that I know people have with measurement. If you know one, I would love to find out. But irrespective, if you approach measurement in the same way that pump is designed with these 8 steps, you're going to make measuring faster and easier, more meaningful, and more engaging. So I created pump more than 20 years ago, and it's evolved since then. Paul's been delivering pump for quite a few years now and also using it in practice for even longer. So together we're going to, Paul, how about we alternate? We'll just go one step at a time, and maybe you can kick off with step 1 in pump.
All right, well, absolutely. And I'm just step 1, Stacey uses this step phraseology, and it really is stepwise. It's about moving through this process. And the very first thing to do, and people always try and jump ahead, is actually understand the purpose of measurement. And it's our first struggle that we talked about, people actually thinking that it's a rod on their back, something to beat them up with, and we need it to actually be a tool that they use to improve their organizations. So we need to stop measuring people. We need to help them to actually focus on measuring continuous improvement and the processes and the results. So this is why pump really begins with a self-assessment that we call it the pump diagnostic. And this is really about helping people to understand the real purpose of measurement, to explore and sense make about why do we actually need to do good performance measurement. So before we get started with any KPI project, we need to make sure that we start talking about it. What's the purpose of measurement? What's the approach? And that we definitely do not start with the question, so what should we measure?
Absolutely. Let's go to step 2, which is called mapping measurable results. As we've discussed, many goals are really, really hard to measure, and it's not because they cannot be measured, not at all. Almost always, they can be measured, but it's that bad habit of using weasel words that makes them hard to measure. So that's what we've got to change. In step 2 of pump, we have a tool called measurability tests, the measurability tests. And what it does is it turns your hard to measure goals or objectives into clear, specific, and measurable results instead. Just saying what they meant to say in the first place, but saying it much better. And the main point here is that before you look for measures, you must make sure that your goals are measurable first.
So if we've made sure that the goals are measurable, we can then move on to step 3. And this is then about designing meaningful measures. So too many of our measures are trivial, or they're not very useful, and most commonly they don't match the goals all that well. And we've already discussed that brainstorming is actually part of the problem there, and it's not actually a measure design technique. So step 3 replaces that brainstorming or whatever else you're using with a very deliberate measure design technique that consistently produces measures that people feel much more excited about. Measures are quantifications of evidence so that we don't need to describe the evidence of our goals before we can, so we need to describe the evidence of our goals before we can actually go about developing the right measures for them. So that's what it's all about in step 3.
We can then go to step 4 before we put too much effort into bringing our measures to life. It's called building buy-in to measures. One of the struggles that we haven't really talked about is in this webcast is how hard it can be to get people to commit to and to own a set of measures and support their implementation. Typically, it's much easier to ignore them or just to debate them and hope they go away. The bad KPI habit here is that we think that getting people to sign off on a list of measures means the same as buy in, but it doesn't. So step 4 of PUMP is where we use a technique called the measure gallery. And what it does in a really organic, social, easy, comfortable, non-threatening way, it builds buy-in and generates excitement amongst a much, much bigger, broader group of stakeholders than the people who actually created the measures. And it happens without much effort or time. We just cannot send people a list of measures and ask them for their feedback and to sign off on them. To get buy-in, to get true ownership, they must be actively and voluntarily involved, even if just a little bit.
So if we've got them actively involved, then actually what we're starting to move on with in is step 5, and we're looking to actually start to implement the measures. And it's another struggle in measurement is that there's a huge cost to producing these measures and the reports, especially if these measures are ones that nobody's going to use. So the bad habit here is actually around a lack of discipline in how to measure, how the measures are actually defined and how data is collected. And there's a huge amount of assumption that is left in these measures. So in this 5th step of PUMP, we're using a measure definition technique to detail exactly how each measure should be scoped, calculated, and implemented. We often assume that people know how to do this and how to implement each measure, but they don't. And the waste actually adds up to tens or thousands, hundreds of thousands. So we just need to be really clearly define each measure that we want to implement and support people with a technique to actually get to that level of detail.
Then it's easy to get the right data and go on to step 6, which is interpreting signals from our measures. There's a struggle that a lot of people are not even aware they're having, and that is about how much they disagree on what a measure is telling them. The bad habit is deeply held in this common practice that's really hard to accept, and that is ignoring patterns in the data over time and focusing too much on individual points like what this month is doing compared to last month. In step 6, of PUMP, I'm losing count, we use a very powerful graph here for all of our measures that shows valid signals of change in our measures that everyone agrees on, everyone can agree on because the rules are clear. And this is called an XMR chart. If you're curious about it, you can find plenty that I've written over at my blog, measureupblog.com. Just put XMR into the search box and you'll find heaps.
So step 7 is then actually about reporting the performance measures. So reporting, as per my background, reporting in business is actually becoming an industry. And a lot of these reports can be bloated with people's favorite graphs, loads of explanations, progress of actions. But the bad habit that we actually have in all of this is that we're using the performance reports to cover our backsides. Or, as I like to observe with some of the leadership teams I'm working with, sunshine pumping, which maybe that doesn't translate for you, Stacey, given that you have so much sunshine down there anyway.
We do.
But rather than focus on continuous improvement action, we're always trying to justify or give anecdotal evidence about how successful we've been by using these performance reports. So in step 6, PUMP step 7 of Pump, I've done it now. We challenge those reports to make sure that we're really focused, not on the latest and greatest dashboard dials or gauges or shimmering techniques in the tools, but we're actually focused really in on some principles of report design. So there's 5 principles that we go through, and each of those principles are really focused on helping us to easily answer 3 really critical questions that every performance report really should be able to answer. So what are they? The 3 questions are: what is performance doing now? Why is it doing that? And now that we know that, what should we do about it?
Simple questions, powerful questions. Then what should we do about it takes us into step 8 in Pump, which is reaching performance targets. Reaching, not hitting. I really like the difference between the 2 words. Reaching for performance targets, we're not trying to hit them. Sometimes the only way to reach a target is to shift the goalposts. I'm sure we've seen that happen before. Otherwise, targets are rarely reached, and people rarely believe in their ability to reach them. The bad habit that's lurking behind this, all these targets that we miss, is that our change initiatives usually focus only on symptoms rather than on the root causes. It's just somebody's great idea about how they think something might be better, but they aren't actually getting to the root cause. So the technique we use at step 8 in Pump guides us to use our measures kind of like as the, oh, thank you, Lisa, I forgot to bring up step 8. There you go. Hopefully you can see it now. Yeah, using measures as kind of like a lens that we look through to focus our improvement effort and to help us find the highest leverage process improvements that will make the biggest leaps towards our targets so we can have a higher chance of reaching them. So your selection of process improvements and strategic initiatives really need to be guided by your performance measures, not the other way around.
So you might have gathered that in Pump, we have a very deliberate performance measurement process. It's a grouping of steps and very deliberate techniques that are designed to directly deal with the struggles that Stacey's identified over the 20 years and that we have the world over. And in measuring performance and KPIs, it's the most common things that come up. So doing performance measurement deliberately, like this is actually what makes measurement work. One of the most common things I hear from people that are coming through Pump is that the stepwise nature that's been built into it really helps, because if we get stuck, we just go back a step. We actually go a little bit further into it, and then we move back into the step that we were struggling with.
Lovely. Okay. We don't do performance measurement because everyone does it or because we're told to. The idea is that we measure because measuring helps us reach our targets sooner and with less effort. It gives us leverage. And measurement should not be hard and time-consuming and boring. It should be easy and fast and engaging. And it is when we're deliberate and we master the process like we master any other skill in our work. It should be meaningful and it should be engaging. And it is when we involve the people in the right ways for the right reasons. Now, remember we did this webcast because Paul's got an upcoming Pump Blueprint workshop for you, and we wanted this webinar to be useful for you so that you could test, maybe even be impressed by how simple a different kind of thinking approach can be that can have a radically better effect on the quality of measures you come up with. And I reckon that if you've enjoyed what you've learned today, you'll be blown away by just how much practicality and usefulness there is in the full Pump methodology. So here is how you can find out more about what Paul has scheduled in London in December. Paul, do you just want to jump in and tell us a bit about the workshop?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm just looking at the time. We're kind of getting close to the hour.
Yeah, so I mean, you guys can read on screen that it's coming up on the 3rd and 4th of December. If that's a date that's free for you, it is in central London. And if you're interested in learning more or to actually register, then we've got a bit.ly link. So bit.ly/pump-workshop, or you could just email us on hello@rubica.co.uk. The most common people that find value out of the Pump Blueprint workshops are people that are involved in the strategy or performance professionals. They're probably managers or leaders, but also business and reporting analysts. So if those are the types of roles that you fit within, it's probably actually going to be supportive to your thinking and how you want to move things forward. It's also, though, for those that really know that measurement is fundamentally an important process to actually move the organization forward, and that you need that skill in-house. So in Pump, we are taking you through the actual techniques over the 2 days, taking you through the various tools and setting you up so that you have a good understanding, so you can actually take it away and do this very deliberate work within your own organization, and to start to change that performance culture in your own organizations.
Super. Lisa's just asked a question, Paul, I think is important to answer. She said, does the course provide accreditation? Lisa, Pump is certified by APMG, and they are the world's leading certification body. So that was such a thrill when they agreed to, I took a look at Pump and the way we deliver it and the way we evaluate people's skill, and they were happy to take us on as another one of their certifications. So that happened earlier this year, and I was very excited about it. So yes, you do Pump, and you take the exam through APMG, and you receive a certificate from them, and you also get a little social media badge saying that you're Pump certified, and you can sport that in LinkedIn and places like that if you want to. Paul, before we wrap up, I know that we're already at time. Have you got time to hang on for another 10 minutes or so in case people want to hang back and ask us questions?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So if you do have any questions, why don't you go and find that question box and type them in. And for those of us that can stay with us, we can work through any of those questions that people have. And for those we can see some people are needing to head off. So thank you very much for sharing your time with us this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Your participation has been outstanding. It's been so much fun. It obviously puts pressure on us finishing on time, but I don't mind. I just think the input from all of you has just made the discussion so much richer. So thank you very much. Paul, I'm not seeing a question come in just yet. There were a couple from people that submitted a question when they registered for the webcast. So I might go to a couple of those and just give everyone else a little bit more time if they want to type in a question.
Okay.
So Deborah, when she'd registered, asked, how do I get started with introducing Pump to my organisation? I definitely have some thoughts here, but do you want to kick off and answer?
Yeah,
Deb?
well, it's a nice, simple one really for us actually, because it is really basically step one within Pump. And there's various techniques, but we talked about the Pump diagnostic, and that and another tool that we've got within Pump around the mindset are two brilliant tools that can really start to introduce Pump as a methodology with a small team that we want to perhaps run a pilot with within an organization, and help them to really explore and come on that journey with us.
So those two tools, if you again go to my blog, you can get a little bit of a experience with them. Just put diagnostic in the search box on my blog, measureupblog.com, or mind map, and both of those will bring you to the two tools that Paul just mentioned.
And in fact, actually, although Stacey's mentioned it a couple of times, for those of you that haven't been over on her blog, there is a wealth of information. So if you haven't checked it out yet, you really do need to.
I've been writing almost weekly for 20 years, so yeah, there's a fair bit there.
Makes me feel guilty for not sharing.
People find it eventually, I guess. That's all good. Still no questions coming in from our audience, and we're down to just a couple of handfuls of people. So I don't know, Paul, maybe we wrap up then, hey?
Yep, I think so. So for those of you that are still with us, so just to really reconfirm what we had. So here's how you register. There's the bit.ly link, so bit.ly/pump-workshop, or email us. And if you'd like an on-site workshop instead of actually coming to the public courses, then again, just let us know, and we can come to your organization or company and actually provide the training for you and your teams in-house as well.
We really believe in the power of measurement, if that hasn't come across already, but we believe in it being done deliberately and done well, and it will transform your performance culture. So please don't wait for all the planets to line up before you get started. Get started with a proper measurement approach like Pump, and you will line the planets up. So thanks everyone again for joining us and for participating so actively. We hope to continue being part of your performance measurement mastery. So thanks again, and until next time, this is Stacey Barr.
And Paul, signing off.